Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was April 2nd, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. I'm going to start out today's document by saying that I did not find this on my own. It is in a very different kind of register. It's register number 1945. And if you have a chance to go poking around in Pares, this particular register is an interesting one. And by the end of this podcast, I am going to know when the binding of these registers took place, because one of the reasons that this particular register is interesting is because of how almost 10 years worth of material ended up in the same binding. And I feel like I read this at one point, and I've said it before on the podcast that I want to know it, and I can't remember it. And one of these days, this year, I'm going to actually return to some of the sources that I have on the history of the archive of the Crown of Aragon, and I'm going to get some definitive answers to when these things were bound, and I'm going to put that into the FAQs. So stay tuned for that. But alas, I don't have enough time to do that right now, so it will remain one of those aspects of dissatisfaction for today's podcast. All right. Well, we are looking at the first folio, the first written folio of this register. This was identified by Daniel Girona y Llagostera in his project of documenting an itinerary for Joan. So remember that Daniel Llagostera y Girona, I just reversed his name. Daniel Girona y Llagostera, he had this mission, and he did it actually for a bunch of the different monarchs. He was intent on finding a document for each day of their reign. It's sort of like, I think spiritual, kindred spirits. That's the phrase I was trying to find. Kindred spirits, this Daniel, Girona y Llagostera, and myself, because we each noticed the abundance in the archive of the Crown of Aragon and realized that you could do some kind of daily treatment because there was so much documentation in there. And I just have to wonder about how he felt when he got to April 2nd, because it was hard to find anything in Violante's registers from April 2nd and Joan's registers. So could have been some kind of holiday of some kind, I don't know. But it seems like there aren't a lot of documents to choose from for April 2nd. And just so happens that at the very beginning of this register, 1945, it's right there in the first folio. And when we say folio, this is actually a good reminder, the folio numbering begins in an unusual way. I think you could say it's the first written page. So often in these, there's some blank pages, there's a title page, but the numbering system that is used pretty consistently in the archive of the Crown of Aragon for these registers at this time is starting with a numbering system that is commencing on the first written page. So what we're looking at in today's document has a 1 at the top right corner. It could be easily mistaken for some kind of damage, but it's actually a written number 1. And at the top left, in handwriting in script that is from a later time period, you can really notice the difference in the shape of the letter forms. We have CUR.2 for Curie 2 court documents, the second volume of court documents. And then on the next line of that later script, we have RX for Rex, and then JOA for Joan, and then the Roman numeral 1 for Joan the First. Yes, we do, Shadow. All right. Thanks, Shadow. You're participating. Okay. Now, the content of this document itself is not all that revealing to me, because I really do not research all of the conventions of the granting of salaries and pensions. This type of salary that's being granted to someone named Petrus Sorridos is a cena, so C-E-N-A. The word cena is also the word for dinner. So it's really tripped me up when I saw that word everywhere in these registers, but it's also used to indicate a certain type of payment, and I haven't quite worked out exactly the relationship. I did research this once, and there was some kind of like custom of being provided a dinner that was way back in the earlier centuries, and the word kind of held over, and it is no longer anything to do with providing a dinner. It's just the name of that type of payment. And I heavily relied on my usual LLM help, because this one is in Latin, and it seems to have just a lot of boilerplate language, and so trying to figure out, is there anything in here that is not boilerplate, that is interesting, that can be a tip-off to anything unusual? Well, that's something that with the Latin documents, I know, Shadow, I'm really relying on the large language models at this time to help me with. And I didn't really get much. So I did work to try to figure out some of this, and to figure out if there was, anything beyond boilerplate, but it really did seem pretty boilerplate to me, to be honest. So I don't have a lot to report about the content of this document itself, other than to say that it's in a really funky register, because not only are we talking about the very first written folio of this sheaf of papers, but if you look around at this register, what you'll find is that, and this is described in the cover page, the first 37 folios have documents from a really surprising range of years all throughout Joan's reign, from 1387 to 1396. And then starting with what happens after folio 37, it's almost entirely 1395 to 1396, from the last year of Joan's reign. So there's a few other documents in this register that we might use this year, but there aren't any others from April, and there's like one in September and one in July. It's a real hodgepodge. So it really is a mystery to me how this register got put together, and why there was such a dramatic time gap in the documents. Something else that's different about this register is that after you get into some of the documents, there's a divergence in the way that the date is recorded. So what we're looking at for today's document, it follows the convention where the last two lines of the document are a dating clause in the way that we're used to seeing. But then when you get further into this register, you start to see that the date is actually recorded up above the document in brackets, sort of like how this document has pro Petrus Sorridos in brackets at the top. So later on in this folio, you get the date put in there. It's very unusual. So I'm not quite sure what was going on with the way that these documents were created or why they didn't go into other registers at the time, and what this reveals about the operation of the chancery. There's just no shortage of questions, is there? But hey, one last thing. Just as there are holes in my knowledge of the salaries and pensions that were granted in the Crown of Aragon by the monarchs at this time, there are holes in this document. It actually is a different kind of view of the worm damage. You can really see, because this is folio 1R, that there's like a bit of like a cavern that goes down in these holes, that basically what you see at the top is larger than the hole that appears at the bottom. And I just did a quick click through of these folios, and I can tell you that by the time you get to folio number 8, there's not really that many wormholes anymore. So it is the case that the worms were playing around in these upper folios and were not burrowing all the way through, that they just kind of were going around at the top and then gave up or died before they got too deep into the rest of the pages. And it just is another piece of the materiality of these documents that I find to be pretty fun to think about, and the passage of time and when that happened. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt cara compagnona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, and goodness, well, how could you not for this episode? I have done my job. Remember, the motto of the Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. If you're listening to this episode way after the date of it, which is April 2nd, 2026, then check out the FAQs, because maybe by the time you're listening to this, I will have had time to do that research into the binding of the different registers, or the rebinding of them. Listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.